I'm gonna go ahead and get started, and I think people will probably start trickling in as well. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Allison Hughes, and I'm part of the program planning and outreach team at NC State University Libraries. I'm so glad you've joined us today for the event we're holding in partnership with the Alumni Association to celebrate the Forever Club. The libraries and its partners are working to ensure that our programs are welcoming and affirming for everyone involved. That means that everyone, from event organizers to attendees, has an important role to play in contributing to a respectful and positive environment. That's why we ask you to reflect on the way you pose comments and questions in the chat to ensure that they do not harm other participants. When we speak, the impact of our words is just as important as our intent. Today, we ask that you engage in this program with exploration and curiosity while being kind and intentional with your words for the sake of our community. From here, I'll hand things over to our partners at the Alumni Association.
So hey everyone, once again it is me, Timothy. We are so excited to be collaborating with our partners in the library once again to bring you this tour, the 100 Years of the Technician. And so again, as Allison stated, please go by the ground rules that has been stated by Allison in order for us to have an inclusive environment and a very inclusive conversation about the 100-year technician anniversary here at NC State. And so without further ado, I'm going to get out the way so we can get into this wonderful tour. If you're like me, you're so excited. And so take it away, Allison and crew.
Thanks, Timothy. I'd like to share a bit about our moderators before we begin. Chuck Samuels serves as the Director of Publications and Exhibits for the libraries, with assistance from Exhibits Librarian Emeritus Molly Renda and Provost Professional Experience Program student employees Miranda Green and Henry Stover. Chuck has created the wonderful Technician 100 exhibit at the D.H. Hill Junior Library that our moderators will share with you today. Chris Vidiello serves as the communications strategist for the libraries. No stranger to journalism, Chris writes for Indie Week on art, music, and hockey. Their shared expertise on journalism and student journalism specific to NC State promises to make for an engaging program. From here, I'll turn it over to our moderators.
All right, welcome everybody. I'm Chris Vidiello, and Chuck Samuels is on here too, and we're going to show you this a bit of this fabulous exhibit that we have up at the Hill Library right now in the exhibit gallery. Chuck, do you want to start the slideshow and show everybody? You want to take over the screen for all of us? Would be cool, and I'll continue to sort of introduce the exhibit. The exhibit is organized in collaboration with the Technician 100 committee, which was working all last year and put out a really terrific Perfect Bound book. I don't know if any of you happened to see that book. It was sort of around campus and around town for a while. A really lovely recap of 100 years of the Technician that the committee put together. And the committee, had a lot of alumni of the Technician and current Technician editors and writers working on it. And the exhibit really kind of took that book and played it out in the cases in the exhibit gallery at Hill. So since that book was sort of organized chronologically, we decided, our whole team really decided to put together this exhibit with basically a decade of the Technician's history in each case. So as you're walking around this gallery, you're sort of moving forward in time chronologically. And each decade, sort of highlights developments in campus journalism that are happening in that decade, but also the student experience on campus and showing the university's history from that perspective of a university documenting itself through student voices. Student journalism is different from, the newspaper that thumps on your front stoop every day journalism. And you really get that sense in this exhibit. you get to start and see, in the early cases, the impact of World War I on campus. You get to move through the interwar years through World War II. You move into the 50s and into the 60s, and you sort of see the really mixed take that campus had and that students had on the civil rights movement. Then you move into the 70s, and you see protests continuing to happen throughout the conflicts in Southeast Asia. And then into the 90s, when there was a lot of racial strife on campus, and the Nubian Message newspaper, NC State's Black newspaper, was founded out of that. Now, of course, the Technician and the Nubian Message work pretty closely together, and cover varieties of the student experience on campus. So today the Technician is operating on multiple platforms. It's a 21st century newspaper in every which way, and this exhibit really captures the journey from those early issues that really do look like they were coming out in 1912, and the contemporary issues and the online presence of the Technician today. So we also have a couple standalone cases that sort of look at two of the newspaper's most famous alumni, and I think Chuck will talk a little bit more about that as he sort of zooms in on a few of the cases that we all thought would be of particular interest to the Forever Club. So Chuck, why don't you take the wheel?
Great. Sounds good. I hope everybody can hear me okay. Get a nod from Chris there. Can you hear me? Sounded good. Okay. Yeah, I want to thank everybody as well for coming and joining us today to look at this exhibit. This has been a really interesting year to try to get an exhibit together. As Allison mentioned, I took over during the year of COVID lockdown last year from Molly Renda, who was our excellent and amazing exhibits librarian for many years here at NC State. And she, along with our two student workers, Miranda and Henry, had started this project earlier in 2019. And then as things closed down at the university, this exhibit also sort of ground to a halt. So fortunately, our student workers were still here to help me to learn about this great exhibit that they had already started working on. And with a lot of work and a lot of effort from Chris Vitiello, who just spoke to you, and student workers, and even Molly jumping in to help acquaint us with this material that they had gathered, we were able to pull this exhibit off and get it in place earlier in the early spring of this year. So we're really excited. We're also, Allison didn't mention this, but I wanted to throw this in there too. Right now, our buildings are limited to only NC State students and faculty who have IDs to get into the building. But hopefully at some point as the summer goes on, we'll start to open our buildings to the general public too. And all of you might be able to come and see this exhibit in person. We're very excited about it. As Chris mentioned, we wanted to show you a few cases that we felt might be interesting to you today. And I've done a little bit of work here on these slides to put together some images of the cases for the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And one thing also Chris didn't mention was that we gathered a lot of artifacts from alumni from the Technician who had worked with the Technician over the years. We got a lot of objects, a lot of items, almost too many really to put on display, but we worked to put a few things into these cases to breathe some life into them. It's always nice to have real objects to go into these cases. As Chris mentioned, the exhibit takes this chronological approach. As you start the exhibit, you come into the sort of entry area of the exhibit. You see the early years, the first couple of first few years, and then as you get to toward the middle story on your left-hand side, the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And I'm going to walk you a little bit through those and point out some of the things that you might see if you're able to come visit. This is some images from the 50s case, and I don't know if you see my pointer as I'm moving around the screen, but in this left-hand picture, one of the things we did with all the cases was to use a really large blow up of one of the front pages from that era, and so each case has a blow up technician front page on the back of the case, actually printed on newsprint, so it really has the nice feel and look of the right kind of paper that the newspaper would have been on. And here in the 1950s case, you know, we see NC State in a time sort of launching into the civil rights era. The text in the case talks about how NC State had its first Black grad students in 1953, and this was a year before the Brown versus Board of Education was decided. We also had our first Black academic staff member, Justina Williams, in 1958. And also some changes in the paper. The paper went, in 1957, the paper went from a weekly paper to a twice weekly paper. In each of the cases, we also have a profile of either an editor-in-chief or a person who was influential at the technician at the time. In this case, we have cartoonist Johnny Crow shown, and he was responsible for doing quite a few pictures of what some folks believe was the beginnings of the Mr. Wolf, which was Zeke Wolf or Zeke Wolf cartoon at the time. It's a really nice story about Johnny Crow that you can read. I also have a coffee mug that was actually made in the 80s, but features one of these pictures. There's some talk in this case too about some of the beginnings of the civil rights movement, and certainly it goes farther into NC State gets more into that, and we realize, you know, technician has a history of both taking part in civil rights, but also sometimes ignoring civil rights, and we might talk a bit more about that as we go on. In the 1960s, in the 1960s case, we certainly see technician reporting more on civil rights and the women's rights movement at the time. The university, or I'm sorry, the technician really assisted students in opposing the name change for the university at the time. The Board of Governors for the university system was wanting to change the name of NC State to UNC at Raleigh, and the students, assisted by the technician, mounted a really good effort to oppose that name, and ended up getting the name changed to North Carolina State University in an official way. Again, as I mentioned, you know, the technician often covered civil rights, and sometimes they didn't. When Martin Luther King Jr. came to NC State in 1966 and spoke at Reynolds Coliseum, the technician didn't cover it. But when MLK was assassinated in '68, their front cover just talked about the riots among students at Shaw University, and focused more on the destruction of property than talking about the slain civil rights leader. So, you know, you know, these things become something we want to discuss, and we want people to understand and be able to see here in the exhibit. The profile in this case is about Cora Kemp, who was NC State's first female editor-in-chief, and tells a really good story about her coming to the newspaper and as a student becoming part of the technician staff at that time. And I urge you all to hopefully get a chance to see the exhibit in person. We also, on the far right there, you'll see we've featured some notes that were created by Alice Regan during her research, looking into the history of the technician, and we were lucky enough to be able to put her actually handwritten notes in the exhibit. So you'll see some of these things as well throughout the exhibit, things that are part of our special collections at the university that we've been fortunate enough to be able to put on display for you. Jumping over to the 1970s, this one was kind of fun, a fun case to work on. We found that we had a good number of artifacts that were given to us by technician staffers from back in the 70s. We had some great, this Wolfpack basketball special edition magazine that was done in 77, 78. Some great photography in there. We also, inside features Clyde Austin, and also features Genia Beasley, who was a women's basketball star at the time. One of the photographers, I believe Chris Seward, who was there at the time, loaned us this great original photograph of Genia Beasley. You can see on the far right there, reaching for the ball. Really some great stuff. We also were able to go through the archives at Special Collections and find some student-done cartoons that we've put in place here in the exhibit. You can't quite see them, but you know, the covering the spectrum of things like where do you park on campus, what it's like to go through, try to study for exams while your roommate is listening to the Grateful Dead all the time. So certainly some concerns of the 1970s. You know, in the 70s, we also had, again, issues around civil rights. The technician was influential in telling the stories of what was happening. The technician reported on letters that the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare had sent to the university system about violations that the university was accused of of the Civil Rights Act, of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And in addition to that, technician during the 70s was awarded the best newspaper in the Southeast by the AP, which was a great thing for the paper at the time. Interestingly, there was not a lot of talk in the technician about Roe versus Wade during that time, but certainly plenty of talk about Nixon. I think students enjoyed hearing this ongoing saga of the Nixon scandal and resignation, ultimately resignation. The 70s was also a time when some of the first tensions around LGBT issues came up. And in the 70s, there was a first letter to the editor written by an openly gay student, and there was reporting about what now we know of as hate crimes toward gay students, with graffiti, really offensive and hateful graffiti in the free expression tunnel. So we've been really excited to put a lot of this information into the exhibit. We have, we've got this exhibit hall that has 15 cases in it. We had 10 decades to cover. So we've got some extra space. We found some room to talk about some of the changes in technology in the newsroom. For myself, my background is in graphic design. I'm an NC State design school graduate. I didn't have the experience of working in the newsroom, but so many of the things that I see that I see photographs of, and I see that these donors brought to us to loan for the exhibit, very much speak the same kind of language that I'm accustomed to. So it was sort of fun to work with my PEP students who were working on the exhibit, and they said, "What is that thing?" I was like, "Oh, that's an enlarger. Don't you know what those are?" And they go, "No," because they're coming up in the age of digital photography. But Here on the left-hand side is a Bogan enlarger that was donated to us by, I believe it was Simon Griffiths, who's a local Raleigh photographer still, who was a staff photographer. This would have been what you make enlargements with from your black and white or color negatives and print them on paper. We've got all this great, these timers and that you'd see in the image on the right. We've got these film loaders and film reels. Photographers would have had to process their own film at the time and use liquid chemistry to process their images. And all of these things were donated by the photographers. I had a lot of fun explaining these to my student workers, design school workers who were unfamiliar with a lot of this. Bulk film rollers in the left-hand picture, you would have had a big roll of 50 yards of film that you would have rolled out as you needed it. And again, some really neat things of pieces of ephemera like reporters' notebooks. People had held on to these, which was really neat to see. Sometimes in just some scribbled, some shorthand, really great to be able to put these in the exhibit and let people see them as part of this working newsroom. And then we got a couple of these early word processors. I believe these were the kind you would have typed in. It would have stored information in the unit. It would have been able to print some things out, but you would actually have connected it to a telephone to send your story remotely into the office. So this is our newsroom case. I think I'm going to pop over to I think just one or two more cases here, and I feel like we're doing okay on time, I guess. This in the center of the exhibit hall, we have two cases about important alumni from the technician. One of them is Richard Curtis, who was a student during the 1970s and who was editor-in-chief in 1970 and 71. Actually, I should have said the 60s and 70s. He was a design school student in the Department of Product Design, and he went on to be the visual design editor for USA Today newspaper when it came out in the 80s. And so we have some great pieces of newspaper here that we were able to get from USA Today, get some reprints of theirs, and then a fun sort of spoof 1990 NCSU Today April Fool's issue that takes its cues from USA Today. And I believe that's the last case we're going to dive into depth on. And at this point, Chris is going to take over, and we're going to show you some of the things that really the thing we wanted you to take away from this is that there's so much of this information available on our library's website that you can go check out for yourself. So I believe I need to unshare here, Chris. Isn't that right? So you can.
Oh, yeah, I can take the screen here.
Cool. I did want to just show you, and what we'll do at the end is we'll include these links for you. I have this link here for the Technician Archive, and then we also have some links for the for university timelines. So I'm going to hand it over to Chris. There we go.
All right. Yeah, I am. Is everybody seeing this this technician front page of the library's collections? Somebody give me a yes. Yeah. So thank you, Chuck, for the whirlwind tour of the cases. Now I'm going to show you this resource at the libraries, part of our special collections research center's rare and unique digital collections. All the technicians digitized and ready for you to browse. This is publicly available, by the way, so you can next time you're having an insomniac night and you want to drive down memory lane, you can just dive in here and start clicking through technicians. It's super easy to use. There's keyword searching in it, so it's a lot of fun. This is what we used to do a lot of the research that was behind some of the content that Chuck perused in his tour of the cases. So I kind of want to just dive into a few issues and a few things that happened during the late 60s, early 70s, just to sort of show you how some of those highlights, some of those big events showed up on the pages of the Technician. But I also want to just really quick show you a second resource that we have through Special Collections, which are these historical state timelines. You can dive in and look, sort of read the Technician page by page, but our archivists and librarians have been building out these great topical timelines. So you can sort of say, well, I'm interested in, the history of campus visitors or campus athletics, and you get a decade by decade timeline. So you can dive into the 70s in athletics and see all the stuff that's happened, first African-American recipients of football scholarships, etc. The timelines are really great, and you get, they're rich with pictures, and you can dive out into the digital collections of photographs as well from the timelines. So 2 resources you need to be aware of: the Technician issues, all digitized, and all of these great historical state timelines that we also have available to you, publicly available. Have fun with them. But let's dive into some Technicians here. I wanted to just sort of look back at a couple protest moments in campus history. Here we have a Technician from May 8th, 1970. This is the issue that is 4 days after the massacre at Kent State, for instance, that happened on May 4th. And so, there were crackdowns on presentations on campuses all over the country, and NC State was no different. In this issue, I'm going to be doing some zooming in and zooming out, so bear with my wonkiness here. Here you can see a march to the Capitol today on May 8th, the largest brickyard rally ever. Here's a nice picture of the front of the Hill Library, although I don't know if it was the Hill Library at that time, the Erdahl Floyd wing. And just 2,000 students on the brickyard for the Indochina convocation. But one thing that's most interesting about looking at the Technician through this kind of archive lens is you get to see the other articles. There was a meeting of campus leaders from all over the country with President Nixon. And you can see down here, if you're looking at my pointer, they went to the White House, among them Bill Friday of the Consolidated University of North Carolina and other university representatives. They were basically meeting with the president to say, hey, the militaristic crackdown on student protests on our campuses is not okay. And the president saying basically, yeah, we'll let up a bit. That both did and didn't happen, but it's an interesting moment. And when you get to really dive into a front page or the guts of a Technician, you really get to see that. I want to actually dart one issue forward. May 11th, 3 days later, we get this great issue, which shows that march to the Capitol that happened on the 8th, and you get to see this great picture taken from the 20th floor of the Holiday Inn downtown. 6,000 students marched to the Capitol. It's a great picture, a fun one to look at. Yeah. Students were sometimes taking these photographs. Sometimes they're pulling photographs from the national press, from like UPI and AP. But I think that this one was a student captured photograph. They knew to get up in the Holiday Inn to take this picture. It's pretty good. Also, there are some good typos in the caption that show that they were hastily cramming the issue together to get it out to cover these events. So I'm a nerd. I like to see the typos in the newspapers too. Let's jump forward a couple of years.
I was just going to jump in and comment that front page you just showed is the one that we've used in in the case, and you really get a chance to see that image printed really nicely in the back of the case. So hopefully, if you all get a chance to see it in person, you'll get to enjoy that.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. The school, of course, organized a peace retreat. It was almost, there were arguments, and you see them through editorials at this time about students wanting to boycott classes, and campus administration saying, don't boycott classes, don't disrupt what we do, don't disrupt education, have your protests, and then continue life as normal. So it's an interesting sort of nuanced conflict between the students and the administration at this time. But jumping ahead a couple of years into 1972, I found it really interesting. Protests are still continuing, but they have a different sort of political angle. I think this is a pretty fascinating issue. Wilbur Hobby, a Democratic candidate for governor in North Carolina. Here you can see him. He has sort of this great, actually here, let me get a little bit further out so you can see this awesome image of gubernatorial candidate Hobby here, talking to students on the Brickyard. And then also Terry Sanford was about to appear. At this moment in April of 1972, Terry Sanford was one of the front-running candidates for the Democratic nomination for President of the United States. And that was the context in which he was appearing on the Brickyard on April 24th, 1972. It's a pretty fantastic issue, and looking through this and looking at the editorials in the issue are really interesting as well. So that's the front page, and you can, of course, dive in and check out the editorials. This was a really fascinating editorial in this issue. It's an exhausted, writer for the Technician, who's basically saying, I'm tired of covering marches, and so are all the other journalists. There's I have to read you one paragraph in this. I know I can't read you every word of the Technician, but it's kind of worth diving in and reading. Another march, where he says, after watching the bored face of News and Observer reporter Jim Lynn at the meeting in the Union and later at the March to the Capitol, some sarcastic thoughts crept into my impressionable sophomoric mind. So it's a pretty fascinating and very conflicted take on the protest movement from a student who was participating in the protests, certainly politically engaged by the issues, but also having to cover protest after protest and cover years of sustained outrage and showing that kind of journalistic exhaustion. It's an interesting little document, and you get that when you dive in. I wanted to show you a little bit of Nixon stuff. This is an interesting thing. Chuck mentioned Nixon coverage. Students were certainly very, very interested in it. Between the Watergate break-in and Nixon's resignation, over 2 full years passed. And a lot of the key moments actually happened during the summers, which creates an interesting issue for the Technician, because the Technician was, of course, not publishing a lot of issues during the summer since school wasn't in session. It doesn't go completely dark in the summer, if you remember, but there are fewer issues and they don't have as many pages to them. So some of the key events, for instance, Nixon's resignation, which happened in early August in 1974, there wasn't a Technician issue right after that. So it was old news by the time the Technician resumed publishing in the fall semester in late August 1974. We'll take a look at some things there. But I sort of wanted to show you a couple things. This is the issue that came out right after Nixon's address, big press conference and address to the nation, where he said the famous line, "I am not a crook." And it's not on the front page. There are other political issues on the front page, but I think that what you see is not so much coverage of Nixon, but great editorial coverage. So here there's a politics professor, Abe Holtzman, who writes this great editorial here with the subtitle, "We are presently suffering a crisis of integrity," and an interesting precursor to other times in terms of controversies around the president of the U.S. It's a great editorial, and you should read it. It also sort of shows you kind of some of the journalistic style. Can you sort of see these all caps, bold-faced subheads? You see this all throughout the Technician in the 70s, where instead of sort of making a break with a subhead, they sort of divide up the article and give you sort of key points to move through. It's an interesting writing style that was adopted by the Technician as a whole. It's not specific to a particular writer. There's a lot more stuff with Watergate, and a lot of good editorials and so forth. Here's the issue in August 26th. So remember, August 9th is when Nixon resigns and climbs onto Air Force One to fly away. So it was old news by the time the Technician resumed publication here, first issue of the semester. And if you look down, I'm going to scroll down, way down to the editorial section. There's really not much of a mention. There's sort of this humorist column, this 30 column by this columnist who kind of uses the burning of the Watergate tapes as a bit of a joke. But then there's this great Doug Marlette cartoon that was in the Charlotte Observer of Nixon here as sort of a Caesar type of character saying to the Daily Press, "Why can't you ever publish any good news about the Roman Empire as it's falling apart around him?" Pretty good stuff there. But then you get into the semester a bit, and here's the September 4th issue. So we're well into the semester. The front page articles are still, about parking stickers and that student offices are moving to an old cafeteria on campus. But the editorial page has some stuff. Let me see if I can find it here. Where's our editorial page? No. Well down. Here we go. I found this one interesting. Nixon should be prosecuted to the fullest extent. A very angry editorial about how you can't let the president get away with this kind of stuff. And then right underneath it is this blissful ignorance column. We have to zoom in a little bit for the great pumpkin tapes here. I'll just read you this great note to start it off. On or about 13 August 74, the following material was found in a pumpkin in West Raleigh by CIA operatives and inoperatives. It will be printed in the Technician weekly during the fall semester as an example of the subversive, counterproductive opinions of the author, an admitted thespian. Below is the first installment of his ravings. So the Technician is both covering it and having a lot of fun with Watergate as well. And you really get that sense as you go through the editorial pages, not so much the front pages of the Technician through the early 70s. This was all happening in 1974. Something else happened that was super important in 1974. That would be the first NCAA championship for the men's basketball team, which got great coverage, and it's worth going issue by issue, but I'm just going to show you sort of 2 pages. The championship was actually being played in the Greensboro Coliseum, so it was almost a local game, just up the road. And in the Final Four, there was a real nail biter of a win over UCLA to get to the championship game. And you can see here, there's this great headline, Wolfpack overcomes Bruins. This is the most overheated, excited, blow-by-blow article. We have to take a little bit of a dive down into it. It's really hilarious. Look at this great hook lead here from Jim Pomerantz. They never said die. The tension, the excitement, the enthusiasm, the competitiveness were all present. 2 basketball teams full of talent, ranked number 1 and number 2 in the nation. It's just great. And he sort of goes blow by blow through it. And he's calling Bill Walton the redheaded All-American in this article. It's great prose. You really have to get a look at it. But one of the other terrific highlights are these great full spread photo pieces. We'll look at a couple of these things. So this is how the Wolfpack gets to the championship game. These great action shots. Look at these things. These are great photographs. I love it. You'll want to dive back in and take a look. But we have to see the wonderful front page after they win the title. Let's see where I have my notes here. Oh, the 27th. This is what you do when you win a championship. You stick a number 1 from the top to the bottom of the cover of the Technician. Wolfpack wins the national championship. I love this. This is great. Look at that huge number 1. They earned it, sure. And then there's some great photography as well. State wins the 74 NCAA title. Great pictures of the celebration, cutting down the nets, wearing the nets around the neck, all the things that you do. The great checkered jackets that coaches wore back then. Oh my God, that's pretty wonderful. I'm glad that's not a color photograph. Just terrific stuff. We move to the next issue real quick for some of the campus celebration. We're back to regular news on the cover, but I did like to say that Hardee's put a full page congratulations Wolfpack ad on page 3 of the issue, which is a pretty hilarious cartoon. But then there's a really wonderful full spread photos of coming back for the campus celebration. I particularly like this picture down here of campus being toilet papered. That's some good stuff. You know, the men's basketball team wasn't the only good basketball team at that time. The women's basketball team was also great. Ncaa was hired during the summer in 1975. And so that wasn't covered because there wasn't an issue. The next issue was in mid-August. So we didn't get a big story about new women's basketball coach, but she immediately made the team not just relevant, but nationally ranked. Now we're looking at an issue in 1978. NC State's women's team was ranked in the top 5. But the coverage is a little bit different. I wanted to show you how they get their coverage. So here's an issue from January 11th, 1978. This is the sports page. You can see there are 2 basketball stories here. A men's page, State hosts Maryland, and a women's page. The Pack is facing the number 1 team in the nation, the powerhouse Wayland Baptist College in Texas. Yeah, I know we still are not really, you know, they haven't been nationally ranked probably since 1978, but they were ranked first in the nation at that time. So we have this exciting sort of regular men's game against Maryland, kind of a run-of-the-mill game, and the women's team facing the number 1 team in the nation. Let's see how NC State, how the Technician covered this the next day. All right. Oh, NC State won, by the way. It was the women's first victory over a number 1 team. We got a good story as so here's the lead story for sports, was the Pack beating the men's team, beating Maryland. And the women's team, they don't have coverage of the game at all, beating the number 1 team in the country. Instead, there's this really a little tough to read piece about a player on the women's team. Here we go. Ronnie Laughlin on the women's team. Here they have this weird lead that's all about how everybody really likes her, is basically the angle of this story. Don Rickles couldn't insult her. Jimmy Connors couldn't swear at her. She's an unimpeachable person. Sorry, I'm not zooming very well here. But check out this quote. I can't imagine anybody being around Ronnie Laughlin and not admiring her, said the assistant women's basketball team. Ronnie is a very well-groomed girl, obviously a very proud person. We respect her as an athlete, but as a person first. Isn't that just weird? A very well-groomed girl. Okay, thanks for that. So coverage wasn't always super consistent, but there you go. It's so worth it to dive into the Technician and look at all this stuff and just have fun with it. I want to show you one last thing, and then we can sort of move into the next phase of this presentation. This is an issue from 1971, and I mean, campus journalism is both very serious journalism. You can see from some of the coverage that we have dived into here, that the journalists definitely think of themselves in that context of we're covering what's happening now, and they are shoulder to shoulder with News and Observer reporters and reporters from other national newspapers who are in to cover local stories. But they're also, a bunch of undergraduates who are probably not going to go on to become journalists. They're going to go on to follow all sorts of different fields. There isn't a journalism school at NC State like there is at UNC Chapel Hill. There's a journalism minor, so it's not like a journalism powerhouse school. Even though the technician has been lauded with awards and especially during, in the 70s and 80s, getting lots of great awards. But here you can just sort of see that it's also a lot of fun to be working at the technician. And I think this page goes along really well with the newsroom case that Chuck showed you earlier. It's sort of showing the typesetting difficulty of working at the technician. Some pictures of these exhausted students trying to get a paper out. And there's this great thing here. I particularly like how this box of text is obviously, like, look at the crooked box that's stuck on there around it. It's like slapping tape down to get an issue out. Pictures on this page are hardly representative of the true torment present in our attempting to publish a thrice weekly rag for the pleasure of our fellow students. So they do have a really good sense of humor about what they do. And they're also, saying that they're also trying to recruit other students to come in and help them work on it. It's just awesome. I also just want to make one more plug for exploring the archives on your own. You also get to see all these great ads. I wanted to point out in 1971, there was a great sale on LPs at the Fireplace on Oberlin Road. You could get the Jesus Christ Superstar LP for the low price of $6.74. So, when you dive in, you're not just going in for the content, but you're seeing all these terrific ads and editorial decisions. It's just a kind of trove. So I hope that everybody has a lot of fun with that and looks back at the issues that came out when they were in school and has a lot of fun with that. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, if I could, and go back to our presentation. Hello. And I think that that we were going to be taking some questions in the chat at this point. I haven't been keeping track of the chat or looking at questions coming in while I was running my mouth. I was trying to scroll around, but if people have some questions, you can drop them in and we'll do our best to address them. Chuck and I were still, we weren't in diapers in 1971, but we were little kids. So the college experience during the 70s is a little foreign to us. But we'll do our best to answer any questions about the era from the experience and expertise we've been able to pick up sort of bit by bit from working on this exhibit together.
So Chris, we have a member of the audience, I hope I'm not putting him on the spot, John Bartlemy, that shared that he was at that major championship game that you mentioned. Would it be okay if we asked John if he could share a little bit about what he remembers?
Oh, that would be great. Yeah, please do.
John, if you want to talk, go ahead, please. You've got the floor.
Yeah, hi, everyone. I graduated from NC State in 1967, and then I did this terrible thing of going to UNC for my business degree and graduated in 72 and moved to Greensboro to start work at Richardson Vicks. And by then, the NCAA championship had become quite a valuable thing in terms of tickets. And they started a lottery system. And you could sign up at some point and send in by mail, I think it was, snail mail. And I was fortunate enough to get 4 tickets. And by then, it was obvious that if you had a home in Greensboro, you could probably rent it out for the week of the tournament, along with the tickets. And I probably could have paid my mortgage for a couple of months if I had done that. Thank goodness I didn't. We kept the tickets. We went to the Final Four games. And of course, the semifinal game against UCLA was by far the most amazing game I think I've ever been to, or even actually ever seen. I think it went double overtime. I don't remember the second overtime. I think I had my head buried somewhere on my lap by the seat because I couldn't watch any longer. I was just, and of course, then against Marquette in the final game, it was a little bit of a letdown, but a little bit nervous and worrisome because was the Pac going to be able to maintain their momentum after that huge win over UCLA? Because at the time, I think UCLA had won 8 or 9 in a row. It was like amazing. And of course, with Bill Walton, the crybaby, I think we called him. They called him the redheaded something, I think. So anyway, it was a great experience, and thank you for having me share some of it.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, the paper definitely captures the fact that UCLA game was the one, and that NC State had to come from behind. Also, that UCLA and NC State had played during that regular season, and UCLA had won. So it was a bit of a revenge game as well for NC State. So, when NC State won again in '83, and this is a big part of the case that covers the '80s in the technician exhibit at the Hill Library. The Final Four was in Albuquerque, New Mexico, so a little past Greensboro, a little further west, and they didn't have the budget to send students out to cover it for the technician. So the students got together, scraped together whatever pocket change they had, piled in a car, and road tripped out there on their own dime, and crashed in a hotel room with like 8 or 9 people, all smelling terrible, in order to go and cover the Final Four and the championship in person. It's a great student journalism story that's told in that case, and really worth taking a look.
I actually have another funny story about that championship game. A couple of weeks before, I was in Raleigh, and I got this double-billed NC State hat on sale. It had lights and a battery kind of thing. Very crazy-looking double-billed hat. And my wife and I went to the Masters to watch the practice rounds starting on Tuesday. And of course, the tournament was on Monday night, the championship. And I said to my wife, and of course it was against Slamma Jamma Houston, no chance of winning. I mean, 0. I said to my wife, if we win, I'm wearing this hat to the Masters tomorrow. And of course I had to, and it was the most exciting thing because I'd walk out there, and the Masters was kind of a subdued, the patrons, right? They're not fans even. And people would come up to me, and some would look at me going like, he's crazy. And others would come up and shake my hand, congratulate me. So it was quite a fun experience.
Any other questions or observations? Just drop them in the chat. Let Brooke know, and we can talk about it.
I just wanted to also mention, I believe that Brooke dropped the links for both of those technician collections and those timeline collections into the chat. So if you get a chance, maybe click those before the program's over. Otherwise, I believe the chat is available is the chat available in the recordings of the events, Brooke? I don't recall if those show up afterward, but do take an opportunity to grab those links while you're here.
Yeah, and both of them are easily found by Googling technician archives or NC State timelines. It'll be the first thing that comes up. They're easy to come upon. I think just hearing your story, John, about about these championships and about these moments, you just look back through these issues, and these timelines, and they just trigger those memories, you know, and you immediately feel those stories. It's just a real joy. Honestly, just looking at the ads, I have a lot of fun looking at those ads. There was a risque dancing and entertainment establishment that had an ad faithfully in almost every issue of The Technician throughout the 70s, which was a lot of fun to get a chuckle at. In addition to just all sorts of awesome restaurants and record stores and things like that really give you a sense of Raleigh culture and the student experience, both on and off campus at NC State in the 70s. It was a great joy.
We're nearing. Oh, sorry. So we're nearing the end of our time, but if anyone wants to unmute themselves and share a quick memory, if anyone feels moved to do that, we would love to hear any memories that you have before we turn it over to Allison for our final words. We'll give it a healthy Zoom pause.
All right. Well, thank you for this. I learned a lot looking at seeing all those newspapers, and it was great, like taking a walk down memory lane and seeing all those and learning more about the university and student journalism. And we would like to thank those that contributed to making the Technician 100 exhibit a success. Those people are Director of Publications and Exhibits Chuck Samuels, Exhibits Librarian Emeritus Molly Renda, and the PEP students, Miranda Green and Henry Stover. Thank you for making this such a special and thoughtful celebration of student media at NC State. And thank you everyone for attending the program today. We'd like to thank the Alumni Association for partnering with us. You will be receiving an email with the program recording and links to selected works from our panelists. You can also request a hard copy of the Technician 100 books. Students put together a truly impressive historic publication that is right in line with this event, and we want to keep showing off their hard work. And we will drop a link in the chat or an email address in the chat that you can use to access those books. You just email student media and they'll be able to get those to you. And I'm going to hand things over to Timothy.
Yes, again, thank you all so much. As a person who's not an NC State alum, I learned so much, and it was awesome hearing more history about NC State. To the Favorite Club, thank you all for coming. We still have more events going on today. As you know, the bell tower dedication is happening today as well. So we're excited to finally have bells in the bell tower and to hear those bells ring here at NC State. So thank you for joining us and continue to join us throughout the rest of this weekend as we celebrate the classes of 70 and 71 and welcoming them to the Forever Club. And as always, go Pack.